Well, I really do have a bit of a realization that Marx had to be simplistic, but this Marxian notion actually plays into the hands of the capitalists. We now have these extreme positions, the capitalist notions based upon our understanding of wealth generation, and the Marxian critique creates this alternative in which things like supply and demand are now the enemy, because it has looked at the way that big capital has manipulated our world to the point where it really has been taken to an extreme. The state really is in the control of big capital. Big money, big banking industries, the industrialists have been able to create a corporation through their connections in the court systems that takes a corporation that at one time was forced to serve the interests of society and had a very short lifespan, perhaps 40 years. The charter then had to go back up for the public to allow to continue. And if the corporation could not prove that it was working in the best interests of humanity, of society, then it would not be given its charter once again. We see the extreme conditions that have been allowed to unfold once we've got vast advantages of wealth and power in the hands of the few. So what I would like to present is some insights that those redneck hick farmers were telling me, and it is really quite interesting. This whole idea that Marx had was brilliant, that it takes labor to increase value. We start with raw materials, and we put our labor into the raw materials, and we create something of even greater value, which we can then sell for a profit. We can sell for more money than it cost us for the raw materials plus the labor. That is a wonderful insight. But where did those raw materials come from to begin with? Marx kind of was missing the origin of raw materials. All wealth has to come from the earth somewhere. It comes from the raw materials. It comes from logging, it comes from mining, it comes from fishing, and it comes from farming. Those things that extract raw materials from the earth. The majority of those, perhaps 3/4 of those raw materials and the wealth that can come from that, actually comes from agriculture. Like I said, this is a biased presentation because those darn farmers were thinking of their own concerns, but they had some incredible insights. They were showing me that you can start with a kernel of corn. You plant the kernel of corn in the ground, and then miraculously, in a few months' time, a matter of several weeks, you have hundreds of kernels of corn on an ear, and you've got several ears of corn on a stalk. You have taken one little bit of organic matter and created thousands of bits of organic matter for every plant that grows. We can take a cow and put grass in front of its face, and like a miracle, milk comes out the other end. Agriculture is able to produce wealth from virtually nothing. That's how we generate wealth. Wealth has to come from those raw materials. The raw materials are created, and then they're able to be processed. They're able to be manipulated through labor. But it all starts with the production of the raw materials. It starts with the farmer. The farmers are able to make, if they're able to make a livable wage, if they're able to make enough money so that they can meet their needs, plus put a little bit aside for a rainy day or for when the machinery breaks down or whatever, what they then are able to do is take their money and invest it in other products that they need in order to do their business. Their money then becomes the source of the next stage, where their their raw materials are turned into finished products. Those finished products are then made into their finished products. They're processed by people who are then paid a livable wage. If they're paid a livable wage, they have enough to meet all their needs, to keep themselves content, plus put a little savings away in case of a rainy day, in case something bad happens. They've got the money to make sure that they don't fall into despair, blah, blah, blah. Those people need to live as well. They need the things that they need in order to sustain themselves, to maintain their standard of living. So they're buying other manufactured and processed goods from other people. And what we found when we look at, I'm actually referencing a number of people, but put together in Charles Walter's Unforgiven, among other publications, that agriculture as the starting point, bringing raw materials into the system, creating wealth, that are selling those products, and it takes 5 to 7 times that money goes through our economy. It is really fascinating to look throughout the entire 20th century that our gross domestic product is 7 times the amount of money that we pay our farmers, which is kind of staggering when you stop to think about it. It is quite simple, though. And those values hold up through the 1950s. Things did happen in the 1950s, though, that changed. And throughout our history in the United States, every time we have done things to manipulate that equation between the farmers and those that are actually processing the raw materials, that entrance into our economy with wealth, if we lower the rate at which they are paid, then there is less money in the system. There's less money that those people pay in order to purchase finished products. Therefore, the money that's bought and used to buy those finished products are used to then further growth of the businesses that produce those products, etc. Every time we've done anything to manipulate or lower that entrance wage, we have resulted in a recession. And I'll get to why in just a little bit. Now, Adam Smith, as it turns out, I really did think he was a bit of a evil man, all those kinds of things for developing this system of capitalism. But I've come to some realizations. Adam Smith was, a product of his environment. Adam Smith never lived in capitalism. He never lived under a capitalist system. The system of mercantilism that was talked about before is all that Adam Smith ever knew. But he theorized. He thought, wow, what would happen if we had a different system where we allowed people's greed and self-interest to motivate them to invest into things that they thought would help them. Once they were always looking out for their economic interests, which ironically our economists think is rational, but it is rather unfortunate because greed is never any good. And I'll have to come back to that as well because we do require a community where we are compassionate and concerned about our neighbors and our fellow citizens. But Adam Smith created a theoretical, imagined idea of a more efficient way to do business than that mercantile system. But he was also extremely simplistic. He didn't realize what would happen once we became a global society and once the corporate sector was able to transform from a small entity that had a limited life and that was mandated by law to serve the interests of society to one that the courts granted the rights of an individual and an unlimited lifespan and no concern whatsoever for anything other than its own profits. I mean, those are the really negative, nasty, extreme end results that Marx was observing in his time and that we're seeing in even a more extreme case right now. But when Adam Smith was thinking, he never imagined anything other than a small-scale, local economy using traditional methods that he was familiar or with which he was familiar, if there's any English professors in the crowd. The notions of supply and demand really are based upon these basic, simplistic understandings. But really, that's what we had in this country at its origins, which is really what allowed democracy to flourish. That's what allowed economic growth to really take place as it did. We have local production. We have small-scale production, where the owner of the business, an entrepreneur, knows its laborers personally, because like I say, it's small scale. There's not so many people that the actual owner of the business doesn't know the people that are working underneath her or him. We had a competitive environment, but it was one that was actually controlled within the framework of a small-scale economy.